Uh-oh, what in the world could this thing be? Well, if you share my views on things, then at first glance you might be of the impression that this is one of those newfangled ergonomic keyboard things. But no, it's not. This is actually a laptop keyboard that I just took out of my trusty Dell Latitude D800 laptop computer. This computer has actually been sitting it out for the past couple of months, maybe even a year or two, because the keyboard in it was, shall we say, ridiculously bad. And tonight, it received a transplant of a good, used, working keyboard. Now, I have been very happy with this machine ever since I bought it brand new from Dell in March of 2005. There are really only two things that it has ever done to displease me. Now, back when I ordered this machine, I did not load it up to the nines and max it out, but it is very nicely equipped for a machine of its time. And back in 2005 or so, when it took the place of my trusty and long-serving but increasingly slow and limited compact LTE 5000 laptop, this machine ran me about $1,800 or so. It had Bluetooth, built-in Wi-Fi, a pretty fast for the time Intel Pentium M processor, and it also followed the Centrino platform. It even has dedicated NVIDIA GeForce Go 5200FX graphics in it. I could have opted for something a little bit better at the time, but I didn't really see any need of it because back then I really wasn't into gaming at all. The last computer game I'd gotten into at the time was a DOS game, and I assure you that this machine is more than capable of running any DOS game that you would care to ever play on a computer. But I digress. I'm getting a little off the subject here. As I mentioned, this machine has only ever done two things that really made me unhappy. Other than that, it's been a great machine. The first of those two things has to be the keyboards. This thing has been an absolute dog about keeping a working keyboard in it, and I don't know what it is that gets them. As you can imagine, I've tried to take pretty good care of this machine over the years, not knock it around, spill things into it, drop it, mistreat it. So it's really come as quite a mystery to me why the keyboards have been so short-lived. The keyboard that it came with from the factory was actually the longest-lived of the bunch. It lasted for a good several years. Dell replaced the keyboard at least 3 other times that I can remember under warranty. So yeah, this machine has had 4 keyboards in it, and just before the warranty was scheduled to run up, it had a few minor issues. It had some wear on the palm rests. One of the touchpad buttons wasn't working very well. The volume control buttons up here were sometimes ignoring my touch. And the secondary fan that apparently Dell does not know anything about, but that serves to cool the GPU in this machine, had also become quite noisy. I never did have any luck in getting them to fix that. But as I said, before the warranty ran up, because the keyboard and a few other things were starting to get uppity, I sent this machine into them for repair. And the keyboard did last another couple of years on top of that, but eventually it too started to become difficult to use, and all of the keyboards died in pretty much the same way. The most often letters, things like the space bar, the enter key, stuff like that, would gradually stop working. And then eventually you would just have to sit there and hammer and hammer and hammer on the keys, which probably wasn't really good for the laptop or its hard drive or anything else, to get any kind of a result out of the machine. Ultimately, the keyboard got to be so bad that even though it was not failing the power-on self-test or causing problems in Dell diagnostics, it was interfering with the successful operation of both the built-in tracking stick-style pointing device and the touchpad. So I don't know if there was some kind of a capacitive or resistive leakage of some kind that was occurring in the keyboard matrix. But what I went ahead and did here, after I got the old keyboard out, is I engaged in some deftly applied violence to get the old keyboard apart. Now, I didn't really care if I completely wrecked it, because I knew that it was already pretty much a write-off anyhow. Most of the keys on it didn't work anymore, and the few that did, you had to sit there and almost use a hammer to get any kind of a result. Unfortunately, this highlights one of the key truths about fixing laptop keyboards, and that's the fact that it's almost impossible to do so. Maybe somebody out there has had some luck with it, but I certainly haven't had. As you can see, most laptop keyboards are constructed using 2 different parts that are somehow cemented together in one assembly. Now, not with actual cement, but usually by interlocking metal tabs, which you can usually get apart without too much violence, or in the case of this keyboard, It's simply pressed together metal pieces. Figuring out how to establish a beachhead from where the invasion could be staged was a little bit difficult with this keyboard, but I finally managed. I finally found a place where the two metal sheets down here by the Alt key were just a little bit loose, and I was able to stick a bladed screwdriver in there and pry it apart. And once I got it to come up a little bit, it was a simple matter of taking my fingers and simply yanking the two halves apart. And as you can see, this poor keyboard has just about had enough. However, I have not managed to lose control yet, though. Okay, I'm sorry. That's computer humor. I'll go ahead and take a look at this because I figured that some of you out there in the viewing audience might be interested in seeing just how it is that the average rubber dome keyboard works, although there are a couple of key differences between this and a desktop style keyboard, namely the fact that the desktop style keyboard has a lot more room in which to work, and therefore has a slightly less condensed version of the same assembly as this. Obviously, this does not apply to keyboards of any real quality, at least not entirely, like IBM Model Fs and Model Ms and the Unicomp counterparts and the various Cherry key switch keyboards that are out there on the market today. But if you have a rubber dome mush board on your computer right now, this is basically how it works. I'd really like to know what the mechanism of failure is for these keyboards, and maybe somebody out there in the viewing audience who's smarter than I am or who has been able to explore this in more depth can tell me. Although I will admit that I have consumed food and drink near this computer, I have always been very careful to never spill anything into it. Like I said, I tried to take pretty good care of this machine because it cost a lot of money. In fact, it's kind of amazing. You know, technology, if it does nothing else, and it certainly never sleeps, it's a lot like rust. It does nothing but get cheaper. In fact, if you were to fast forward all these years later and put together a machine using updated parts, but ending up with something of a similar caliber to this one, I would imagine you'd only be spending about $700 to $1,000 to actually do that. But I digress. Let's go ahead and look at the keyboard here. The first thing you'll see is this membrane sheet, and this looks to be nothing but protective in nature. You can see that there's actually some kind of a substance on here, and at first it kind of looks like, well, maybe it's some sort of a liquid spill or something like that, but I swear it's not. I've never spilled anything in any of these Dell Latitude keyboards, and in fact, whatever this stuff is, get it to lay flat here, you can actually take your fingers and you can just wipe it off, which leads me to believe that it's probably dust. Excuse me. Anyway, these are the scissor action key switch assemblies. This is the part that actually goes up and down when you type on the computer, and although it's pretty wrecked, you can probably get an idea for what goes on in here. You can also see in some cases some of the hand salsa and lint that's built up over the years. But none of that has actually been able to gain ingress into the keyboard's actual working. So again, I don't really think that's what killed it. But in the case of laptop keyboard keys, there are these little scissor-shaped mechanisms inside that condense and let the key go down when it's pushed and provide it with a little bit of the response to being touched so that you know you've hit it, and then it in turn hits one of these rubber discs which presses down on this printed circuit matrix here. This is basically a printed circuit board without any kind of opaque reinforcing material. It's very interesting to look at, and ordinarily, despite the close proximity of these two sheets, each of which have electrical contacts on them, there's no electrical flow until you actually push down on one of the rubber shapes on the other side, and then as you can see, the contacts would go ahead and do their thing, and if this keyboard was working properly, the end result would be a letter appearing in your text handling application of choice. You can also see that there's been evidence of some kind of degradation on the back here. I will admit I did stick this keyboard into the dishwasher once to try and buy a little more time out of it, and while it did so, it didn't do so for very long. Unfortunately, I cannot separate these two plastic sheets, at least not with anything that I have to hand at the moment, and I would imagine that unless I had a very strong magnifying glass, I probably would be unable to figure what the issue is here. I talked about the first thing that this laptop did that annoyed me. And before I get back to that, I would like to ask that, if anybody out there has some idea as to what it is that kills these keyboards, heat, dust, just time, I don't know. I'd certainly welcome your viewpoints in the comments area. I'm always interested in hearing what my viewers have to say. The second thing this machine did that I found unbelievable, at some point I decided I wanted to upgrade the 60 gigabyte Fujitsu parallel ATA hard drive that's in this machine, and I didn't figure that would be any real chore. This machine is running the most up-to-date release of the Dell BIOS A13. I stuck a 250 gigabyte Western Digital parallel ATA hard drive in it, and I discovered, much to my shock, this machine does not support 48-bit LBA. It has a BIOS capacity limitation of 137 gigabytes. I don't know what was going on at Dell Central, but somebody was asleep at the switch, because even much older machines than this, like the Optiplex GX400 and my Precision Workstation 220, all have fully functional 48-bit LBA implementations, but this thing does not. And so basically it's limited, at least if you use an operating system that uses the Int13H BIOS disk handling routines, or that needs to boot up from a drive in excess of what this thing can handle. You're limited to a 120 gigabyte drive or smaller. So that's kind of a bummer. But other than that, like I say, I've gotten along really, really well with this thing over the years. A lot of people ask me, well, what is your primary computer? And I always mention it in the comments, but I figure I'll go ahead and answer it here in a video once and for all while I'm on the subject by saying that I don't have any one regular computer. I alternate my activities between different machines that are configured differently, like that Windows 8 machine back there that you really can't see because of that Optiplex in the way. I have my 2009 era MacBook. I have another couple of desktop computers. All of them are configured to do the things that, to be especially good at the particular tasks that I use them in order to perform. So I would say, yeah, I really have no particular one computer that I use for any given task, but instead I actually have several. The closest thing that comes to my having a regular computer would probably be the MacBook, and that's why I don't use this machine very much anymore, because I really haven't been too terribly interested in the places where Microsoft is taking Windows, though Windows 8 with Classic Shell really isn't too intolerable of an existence, and I've been rather less impressed still with where Apple has taken the Mac OS X operating system, especially with their file handling logic. You know, you can't really, there's no, I'm not doing a good job of expressing this, but there's no conventional save as. You know, they've replaced that with duplicate, and then documents automatically save themselves. I believe they tried that, about 33, 34, 35 years ago, somewhere in there, with the Lisa, and that was not a scintillating success. I have been working with files the same way my whole life, and while I might be an old stick in the mud when I say this, I'm really not too impressed nor desirous of having those conventions messed around with. So maybe I'm heading back to Windows after a couple-year stint with the Mac OS. I really don't know. But one thing I will say that my MacBook does very well is to edit videos. I did find something interesting when I took this machine apart to put the keyboard in it. You can see we have a little blue nub there right by the plate that says Latitude D800. That's actually the track point nub. It had been missing from this keyboard. I had no idea where it had gotten to. But when I popped this little trim strip off of here, I actually discovered that it was hiding inside the machine. So it must have popped off and been ensconced in there for heaven only knows how long. It's a little cleaner than the one that's on there right now, so I'm probably going to go ahead and actually swap those at some point. Now, I recently demonstrated that Dell Inspiron 5100 series notebook, talked about it at great length, and I thought that I would share some things about this machine. Although if you want to see a video featuring this system in great detail, you should go ahead and search my channel. There is a video where I gave an overview and a tour of this machine, as well as some information about the software that was in use on it. It's still running Windows 2000 Professional, even though that's well and truly unsupported. It always ran really well on this machine. I wasn't very fond of Windows XP at the time I bought this, so I actually downgraded it to Windows 2000, and it's been running that ever since. I did think at one point about backing up the entire contents of this system and transitioning it to some sort of a Linux environment, but I have never done that, mainly because, you guessed it, the keyboard didn't work. So I might revisit that at some point in the future. It's really hard to say. One thing I would have to move off of this machine is my entire vintage software collection, because this was the machine I always did all the disk imaging work on. And in fact, you can see it's actually got the Dell optional floppy drive in place. And the optical drive is actually plugged in via this little so-called, I believe this is called the D-Bay module. And although this was allegedly something that Dell sold brand new for these, it was one of many toys for this machine that I never could find offered for sale through individual channels. I finally bought this from somebody on eBay many years ago who was actually scrapping out a whole bunch of these laptops, and I had really wanted to find one of these because it is by far and away the easiest way to have both the floppy and CD-ROM drives or optical drives attached to the machine at any given time. The only thing you can't do with this module, which came as a little bit of a surprise to me, you cannot put the modular bay battery in there. Either the floppy drive, the hard drive module, the travel light module, although I don't know why you'd want to put that in there because that's just an empty plastic frame. All of those will fit this, but the battery does not. If you want to use the modular bay battery, you have to actually plug it in directly to the machine. I'm getting a little bit off the thing I wanted to talk about there. I'm going to do a little bit of software exploration on this machine, an audio quality demonstration, because I happen to demonstrate with one of my CDs how the speakers built into the Inspiron 5100 actually happen to sound. And to me, they were kind of shrill in the mid-range and shrieky in the treble. And this machine, although it comes from a similar time frame, it's just a little bit newer, I believe. In my opinion, it has much better audio. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that, since I've actually got the DVD burner hooked up and a CD in there. Some of you will probably recognize this. This is the Windows 2000 CD player. This CD player, known as Deluxe CD Player, also shipped with the Windows 98 Plus pack. This is a very interesting CD player. It was a very notable upgrade from the very simplistic CD player application that shipped with Windows 95 and unmodified, I almost want to say unplusified for some reason, releases of Windows 98. But instead of using a simple INI file, which was actually limited in size as to how big it could get and how many CD titles and track names it could hold, this thing used a little bit more of a proper database. Actually used a Microsoft Access database, imagine that, to store all the compact disc titles, and so therefore it wasn't limited to 64 kilobytes. It also had the capability of downloading track names and album names from the internet. But unlike everything else in the world that uses the compact disc database, or CDDB, Microsoft had their own ideas and their own methodologies for doing everything, and this program is yet another example of that fact. Instead of using standard connections to CDDB, Microsoft actually used their own database providers, which went dark almost immediately after Windows 2000 was released. I personally never saw them work, even though I installed Windows 2000 during my school career almost as soon as it came out. So those went dark right away. And of course, being that the communication protocol is also unique to Microsoft, there was no way for this program's capabilities to download track names to be exploited until someone by the name of Edie Hinzen came along and created what's known as 3TIX, the Free Track Information Exchange. This person actually provided a plugin that allowed you to connect the Windows 98 Plus and Windows 2000 CD players back to the internet so that they could download track names and even upload track names. You can actually see that there's a couple of albums here that the database does not recognize that you can try again to download in the future. It actually said 6 a moment ago, but in the time since I've played with this machine, I clicked on download now and it was able to successfully identify one of those CDs. Now you might be wondering why I'm going into such detail on this. Well, recently I tried to look up Edie Hinzen's website and connect a Windows 2000 machine to this, and I discovered that the website appeared to be completely gone. There was no evidence whatsoever of it, so you can imagine my incredible surprise when I stuck this Journey CD into this optical drive. The Windows 2000 CD player actually managed to download the database. Now there were at the time a couple of mirrors of that site and that service online. You can see them listed here in the provider list, but I wouldn't have thought that any of them were still online. And yet, amazingly, they appear to be. And it was able to download the track names for this Journey CD. So go ahead and put the same track on that I had playing on the Inspiron 5100, and you can see for yourself what you think of the sound of this machine. I think it sounds quite a bit better, and that's not just because I'm biased by the fact that this was a system I actually opted to buy new back in the day. I love this on-screen display thing for the sound.
When the lights go down in the city and the sun shines.
Alright, probably better shut that off. Again, we don't want to get caned by the music mafia. Just to prove to you that this free track information exchange, 3 ticks, still works, I went ahead and grabbed another CD here that I know this machine does not have on file, does not have in its database. We'll go ahead and pop this into the optical drive here. Push that in. Wait for Windows 2000 to make up its mind and decide that there's actually a disk in the optical drive. This will probably take just a moment. But with any luck at all, you'll get to see this thing actually download the track names, which I thought was pretty darn cool. After all these years, and the fact that Windows 2000 isn't even supported anymore, it was still able to connect to that service, whose website is long gone, and actually download the track names. You can see it's working on doing that right now. I really had expected this to fail. I'll bet whoever's running that mirror that happens to still be online is very surprised to see a copy of the Windows 2000 Deluxe CD player actually connecting to their service. But yeah, it even got the track names right here. See if it'll actually go ahead and play. Yep, sure did.
Well, I pulled out of Pittsburgh, rolling down the eastern seaboard. I've got my diesel wound up, and she's running like never before.
Alright, once again, probably better turn that off. You know, for a video that was supposed to be about changing a keyboard, I've kind of gotten off the subject here. Started talking about all kinds of things, from CD playing software to having ordered this machine and why I ordered it and all that strange stuff, when all I really meant to talk about was just the curious failure of these keyboards. So again, if any of you out there still happen to be awake after watching this pointless epic of a video and you have some thoughts on this, I would certainly appreciate hearing from you. If you have any ideas as to what might be killing these keyboards and what might be possible to do about it, if you have any ideas that might be better than just having bought 10 keyboards total, 1 in the machine and 9 more in the box over there, to try and keep this thing fed for a long time to come. I thank you for watching this video, and I encourage you to leave a comment if you have one.